everyone. Welcome to today's lore video. Today had a pretty big lore reveal per se, but it wasn't as big as I hoped so. I didn't get a chance to make the video for last week, so that way we can get kind of caught up and then talk about this video this week. And I was hoping that this lore reveal was going to be much bigger. So overall, I was unfortunately disappointed in the breadth of this lore reveal, but I do like how they're kind of bringing things together, and it's basically validating some of the other content that I was referring to in my past videos, talking about the Vex researchers, for example, the connection with them, Lakshmi, Chioma's knowledge of that, Maya. All of those things are kind of coming together in the lore, and they are setting up these future story beats that I believe are going to be the future of Destiny 2 after the Light and Dark saga, because they don't particularly have any kind of connection with the Witness per se, or have any kind of bearing that I can see just yet in the game, unless they find a way to kind of bring Maya's, simulations into the real world to then help battle against the Witness in some way. But I think that this is like a future story beat being tied to future seasons past the final shape, because we've already kind of seen the conclusion to the story in these first two seasons. And that's kind of how something was mentioned in a recent Bungie article, that they're going to have two seasons that kind of bookend one expansion, and then two seasons that begin to lay the groundwork for a new expansion. And so this bookend was supposed to be a bookend for Lightfall, but also maybe a bookend for the final shape, depending on the way that they run things. And so that's kind of where things are. But let's get into the recent veil containments. I'm going to run these veil containments so that you can get caught up on the ones that we haven't discussed yet, and then we'll go into detail about kind of why I think that those veil containments kind of lead into some of the theories that I've been talking about already on the channel.
Chioma AC. Log. Whatever. The war mind has reactivated. Our base on Hyperion detected network activity. They found us. Classified our location Nephili Stronghold. We already estimate that Rasputin has attempted remote interference with our network, our research. It can't. I won't let what we learned here ruin more lives. I'm going to send Stargazer off-world to deal with the problem. They can take Lakshmi with them and do whatever. As long as it's out of the city, out of my sight. It's a risk, taking an action off-world, exposing ourselves. But we have to. What we've done here has to be quarantined. The Veil is too much power. Too much for anyone.
Stargazer. That puts the time of this recording around the foundation of the Cloud Striders. Chioma must have been really old.
Stargazer is the one responsible for redacting Nephili's stronghold from Rasputin's records. Or Maya by proxy with Lakshmi. Fascinating. There's 2 more logs left. Once we've decrypted them, I will need to take time to contemplate the larger picture they present.
You and me both.
The Veil is too great a power for humanity to wield responsibly. All that's left is to close down the facility. Neomuna will go on. Humanity will persist, on the back of our unspeakable work. But I won't pass that guilt on to humanity's future. My hands can be bloodied. Let the children have innocence. And in my dissolution, I will find peace.
I don't know if I agree with Chioma's choice to hide the sins of the past. But I also do not know what I would do in her place.
Quinn says there's a data signature on this file, like something else was crawling the network. Vex signature. What's Msund12?
There's 1 log left to decrypt. Perhaps we'll find out.
Years ago, back on Venus, the Vex simulated copies of us, Maya and I. trapped in a virtual hell. After so long, even hell can look like heaven, can't it? I'm tired. I'm done. Maya has to be out there. The Maya I remember. And all I want is one more moment with her. To hold her in my arms. Tell her that I love her. So she can tell me to hush one more time. If we learned anything from the Veil, it's that eventually we all have to learn to let go. So, I made contact with the Vex. I'm ready. And it's time to say goodbye.
In the end, Maya Sandaresh was consumed by her desire to understand and her inability to let go. She and Chioma lost everything in pursuit of knowledge. Chioma abandoned it all, sought to wipe the slate clean for future generations.
What did we learn from all of this?
That the Veil is darkness, the power of consciousness made manifest, as much as the Traveler is the light, the power of the physical world. The implications are great, but so too are the risks. As a younger man, I may have fallen into the same trap Maya did. But now I know better. We must proceed with caution, lest the river sweeps us away.
So yeah, so when we catch up to Chioma and her last this week, she's just destitute, she's done, and she contacts the Vex to kind of take her away. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about that too, and I'll get into that specifically once we discuss the even bigger implication, or at least the one that's going to have more lore behind it, is the Msund12 reveal from the week prior to. And that one's kind of big because there's a lot of lore that has been tied to it, and a lot of lore theory that has been discussed that would have made for some really cool story that can still be taken by Bungie and extrapolated into something cool. And so Msund12 in the lore community has been tied originally to the whole situation with the Oxa machine and the Scions that were using that machine to tell the future. It was theorized that maybe Msund12 was some type of a name for a version of Teox. And Teox, just to quickly recap who Teox is for those who are new to that in the lore, she's actually a proto-hive, and she was part of a coup to take over the Osmium throne from the three sisters, Arash, which became Oryx, Zero, which became Zevor-Arath, and Satona, which became Savathun. And so she was trying to oust the three sisters, even though she was actually like close to the sisters at one point. She was their teacher. She felt like the king was going crazy with the whole Sigidi thing and talking about these terrible things that are going to be happening to the race and how to avoid them, because he was being manipulated by the worm. So Teox saw this. Teox is actually very smart. She's similar to Savathun in that way and very manipulative. And she set them up, and they ended up escaping. That's how they found the ship, the Needle, that took them underneath the Fundament Ocean, that ended up then pushing them to meet the worms, which gave them the deal that turned them into the hive. And all of this, of course, was manipulated by the Witness and the worm that was planted for the father to find from the Witness. And this was all, again, through machinations of the Witness and through machinations of Rolk, and just trying to make sure that the Traveler didn't get in touch with the Proto-Hive, because they were also going to be chosen for the light, which kind of also ties into why maybe it was okay that the Traveler chose Savathun, since in the story they talked about how, this was going to be the Guardians before the Guardians, so they were already set to get the light. And so that's something that hasn't really been explored, but that's the idea behind that. And so Teox gets away, gets into a ship, and gets found by, I believe, the Ammonites first, because she's found by a couple of different races, and every time the Hive have chased them down and destroyed them. And the last known instance was she was found, her ship was found, and it was documented that her ship was missing the remains of the Teox, and then when they finally got to the remains of Teox, she was missing her mind. Like her mind was gone completely from her body, and then later on, the lore talks about a Teox intelligence existing outside of her body, which was again theorized to be this Msund12 that was in the network, in the Vex network, and kind of behind the scenes manipulating these machinations. And the very last thing that I can find is them speaking about that in a lore tab that was mentioned by a race called the Dakua, where they talked about that scenario that that Teox is still out there and Teox's intelligence is still out there, and that was kind of one of the last lore entries of the Books of Sorrow time frame back in the Taken King, and so this is where Teox's story is kind of left off. She's kind of lost her mind is gone. The hive couldn't contain that mind, and it's out there somewhere. And so people theorize this Msund12 is really Teox, and Teox ends up linking up with the Scions, and the Scions have her intelligence somewhere safe and protected, and it's really not a future-telling machine, but it's really Teox who is in the network and somehow simulating these things for them that Axa is, the Axa machine itself is representing. And so that was kind of the idea, because Axa is and Teox, they have the same letters involved, and so this Msund12 and Axa could have been something to do with Teox, or Msund12 itself. And now it could also theoretically be Msund12 being one of the Maya Sundareshes from the simulations, or it could be Maya Sundaresh's own designation that she gave herself when she left her body into the Veil network, and it could still be Teox, being the Axa machine. Teox's intelligence is the Axa machine, and so that was kind of the theories that were thrown around before, and so now it's bringing itself back full circle into this story with the Veil, and now you're thinking to yourself, well, could Teox's intelligence have been created in the same way that Maya enters the network and leaves her body through this chorus and conductor scenario, and she could have done that with one of the other races being also manipulated by the darkness, or also having spoken to the Witness and found a way to do this, or just finding that data herself, just like the Witness Society found the data on their own by somehow interacting with the Veil. Maybe the Veil has been in places that we don't know just yet, and Teox was able to interact with that, and that's how she got a Teox intelligence into the Veil network, which is kind of an out-of-body, entity that can then go into different parts of this ethereal world that exists with the Vex network and the Veil network, the mycelial network with the Egregore, things of that nature. So that's kind of where we are with Teox's story, and now Msund12 is being specifically tied to Maya. Of course, Maya Sundaresh, and that makes sense. Some people have theorized it's like Msund and 1 and 2 is like Lakshmi 1 and 2, and she's just using that as a designation of saying I'm Lakshmi 1 and Lakshmi 2. And again, for me, it could also mean that she's the 12th version of the simulations of like the 168 or so simulations in the Vex network. And I've covered that in a prior video, going over a lore tab that talks about all of these simulations and how they all lined up to try to step out of the Vex network and into the real world alongside of Praedyth, who was trapped in the Vex network and was trying to get back to reality so that he could help join the fight again and also free himself from his prison. And Chioma mentions this is like a personal hell, but now that Maya's gone, Chioma sees now, and she said this could be a heaven, because Maya exists in this Vex simulated network where I am not. And so now the question kind of poses, it sounds obviously like she called the Vex, she's going to find a way to get her mind into the Vex network and make some kind of a deal with the Vex around the Veil, and them trying to get this data around the Veil that they at this point hadn't gotten yet, because again the Vex have stopped attacking the Veil over the time, and they were attacking at one point, they were pushed back, then they stopped, and now she's going to call them back, and then they go away again. So maybe the Vex already got what they needed, and maybe somehow like the way the Vex network is constructed as we know it today also ties to the way that the Veil has its own network too, and maybe the Vex network is just patterned after the Veil network, And of course, since the Vex can time travel and can manipulate time, that part of the way the Vex network exists after being combined with the Veil network, or at least having some type of interaction with the Veil network, can also then technically exist before anybody finds the Veil and before all of the story that we know, because that's how time travel allows you to kind of change storytelling in such a way that you can just retcon anything you want and just say, oh, it's time travel. It's kind of like a MacGuffin, a time travel MacGuffin, but it can be used properly if done the right way. And so they could be setting up a lot of different twists. And one of the twists is it's also quite possible that these researchers, that not all of them obviously made it out of the Vex network. It's assumed that maybe some of them die in the transfer. We don't know how many of them actually stepped out into the real world, and also we don't know when in time they step out of the real world. So these Vex researchers, it's assumed that they step out at the time that that has already passed in our network, but we have no idea of the relationship between the time in the Vex network and the time in our world. If minutes can be years and eons in the Vex network, and vice versa, if they can actually spend a few minutes in the Vex network and outside in the real world, eons have passed. And there's not really a whole lot of good lore on specifically how that works, especially because if the Vex theoretically have connected with the Veil to create the Vex network as we know it, then all the bets are off, because the Veil is this like primordial power that can manipulate everything in the universe. And so now it's possible that these researchers, that some of them, including the 12th version of them, the ones numbered 12, could have stepped out at a different time. And that also sets up this idea that it's possible that the original Chioma and Maya die in the collapse, and that these simulations step out, realize the situation, replace them, and become the Maya and Chioma that are doing the Vex research, for example. Because Chioma kind of, in one instance, it sounds like she's just talking about the idea theoretically about being stuck in a hell, but in another way, her voice sounds like she knows what that's like, and like they've been through that, and she's going back to that to find her Maya again, right? And so she could be referring to the original Maya, the 12 Maya that maybe not have stepped out of the network and asked for her to be resimulated by the Vex as part of a deal for information. Or she could be talking about the Maya that left her mind in the Veil network that somehow also ends up in the Vex network and can kind of freely travel between them because they're somehow interconnected. So there's a lot of cool theory that could be going behind the change of having now your mind outside of your body in a network that is then outside of kind of time and space, and really just a matter of consciousness, because correct as I was in my initial video that the Veil is a specific representation of consciousness and things that are tied to consciousness, while the light is a representation of creation and in the physical. And Osiris says that explicitly in this last lore tab when he's kind of wrapping it up. And so a lot of the theories, like by Mylan and stuff, and kind of talking about how, the Veil is the winnower and so on and so forth, like that kind of falls apart a little bit with that. And I haven't really made that video because I've been really busy, but I was going to go into a video about how you just won't let go of the idea. But hopefully this helps him kind of separate that out now and understand, okay, so then if the Veil is just this consciousness, how can consciousness become the winnower? And so to me that should solidify that and put like an end cap on, obviously the Veil in itself, this thing that we see, is not the winnower. It's just this stream of consciousness and just this representation of darkness and consciousness. And darkness itself is not necessarily a bad thing, because obviously without the light you can't have the dark, and vice versa. And it's what we do with darkness and light that make it good or bad. So good and evil don't exist in that particular realm. But that kind of should put a good bow on that, so that future lore videos from like Mylan and Bive and things will stop referring to the Veil as the winnower, hopefully. Who knows? People could be stubborn with their ideas, and they have the right to have those ideas. Like, that's kind of how we get a lot of cool theories and a lot of these cool side projects that could turn into their own fan fictions later on, especially if Bungie really fails hard and allows people to then create their own versions of their stories, which can then turn into playable side games later on, or at least playable DLCs and stuff, if Bungie ever opens that up. When Destiny's kind of done and we're allowed to then get the source code and then mod the game ourselves, that could be really cool in the future too, to take these ideas that people put out there and create their own little versions of the game that we can play through at a later time. So those are the things that could have possibly happened with this particular lore setup, is that it could be, we're talking about the researchers stepping out of time and taking the place of Maya and Chioma, and those are these researchers, and that's why she referred to the simulation. It could be that it's queuing up the simulations to have that conflict like we talked about between what a real Maya and Chioma would be like, and that in this case Maya and Chioma are now in the network, in the Vex network, and on the level of the simulation. So it's kind of backwards, because now there is that possibility that Maya all this time has been working with her simulations now that she's part of the network and can connect with the Vex network, and now Chioma can get in there. So we're talking Maya 0 and Chioma 0 can interact with the other 168 versions of themselves, and now we have 169, or if it's 169 then we would have 170. I can't remember the exact number. And so it's essential that Bungie finds a way to make this work narratively in a way that doesn't seem so MacGuffin-y, like, oh yeah, well we just, time travel, but still makes it really cool and interesting and exciting, and where it has actual stakes and actual implications on the real world outside of the portal situation with the Traveler, and outside of like all of the other things that we've talked about. And bringing Teox into the mix is another cool thing that they could do. Finally finding that Teox is this other version of intelligence, and it's been existing in the network in situations before, and they could even like make it to where Teox has kind of interacted with us in these really odd ways that we've never seen before, but kind of retconning these small moments in history that were actually Teox touching us and manipulating us and pushing us in the right way, giving us a nice little push, and her being an ally but then turning into a new enemy, because again, Teox has never been one to kind of be so loyal that she would be like a good character. She's always one of those people who's a little chaotic in her way, that she could also be easily turned into a bad character because things don't go her way and she wants things her way. So that's another cool way that Bungie can expand on the story after the Light and Darkness saga. That would be something I'd be willing to play and be interested in playing and finding out more about those particular scenarios, especially if you end up in a lightless and darkless world in that scenario, where we find a way to free ourselves from the light and the dark and their influences, and just kind of like create our own destiny. That, the keyword destiny, quote unquote destiny, that would be the cool thing to do. But those are pretty much my thoughts on the lore and how things kind of wrapped up, how a lot of those situations have come together. And with the new season coming up, I don't know if I'm exactly going to have the time to make the video that I want to make, where it follows each version of Maya and Chioma through each of their kind of 3 different separate interactions, where you have the Maya and Chioma that are the ones that we follow in this Neo Luna story. You have Lakshmi herself being this new version, this new split of Maya, and who knows where Chioma goes from there. And then you also have the researchers, Maya and Chioma's, and the researchers and the things that they've experienced, and kind of explaining each of their paths as far as from the beginning of the first time that they were mentioned all the way through to the last versions of them that we know of, and the things that they may or may not be up to. I do want to make that video, so maybe it'll be probably in the middle of next season whenever things kind of die down, or if this season is just like really bad and doesn't have a lot of good narrative and the story's kind of dry, then sooner, of course, because then I'll have something to do sooner. But thanks very much for watching the end of this lore video. I know these lore videos are really for the people who kind of enjoy just like playing them in the background and kind of hearing the lore and enjoy theorizing and sharing their theories. So if you guys have some additional stuff based on this last reveal that you would like to add in the comments, go ahead and feel free to do so. That way, if I do see that and I want to kind of tie that into a future video, I can. But other than that, thanks very much for watching the end. You guys have a good rest of your day.